Mikhail Gorbachev died about a week ago, and the lesson of his life is that big state systems like ours simply don't work. Yes, they do bad things, it's important to point that out, but what really matters is they just don't work. And that's important because what it means is that the online celebrities who go on video and rant at you about how you should be sending them lots of money so that they can get drunk and go away on holiday, and if you're not 110% about doing this, then you're no use. They are precisely wrong. That is precisely what you don't need to do. You do not need to get ideological. You do not need to be 110% committed. All you need to do, if all you do is wait for the system to collapse and then afterwards look to make sure you can fulfill your need for law, that you can find a legal system, then you are doing plenty. You are doing enough. Our system simply doesn't work. It can't survive. It won't. Okay, how does this relate to Mikhail Gorbachev? Well, there's that's the story 6 days ago from the BBC. Last Soviet leader dies aged 91. Mikhail Gorbachev, the former Soviet leader who brought the Cold War to a peaceful end, has died aged 91, etc. But he was unable to prevent the slow collapse of the Union, and many Russians blamed him for the years of turmoil that ensued. Yeah, with some good reason. He did collapse the Soviet Union. It's not usually it's not the problem itself that kills you, it's the reformer, it's the doctor that kills you. But the main point is that a system like the Soviet Union, the big state Soviet system, that was always going to fail. That was never going to work. Now that was put to Soviet authorities back at the time of the revolution. How are you going to get people to produce if they have no incentive? If the state takes everything and the state spends everything, or if the state it plays such a big part in people's lives, if that's what pays people's wages, and if such a high proportion of what people earn is taken in taxes, no one's going to produce. And that was dealt with really quickly by the doctrine of New Soviet Man, which I'll come to here. Now that's a Wikipedia page about it. New Soviet Man. It's quite fun. It's quite amusing to read about. It's it's a total load of nonsense, but people took this seriously then. There's Trotsky, and probably the only man who could possibly have been worse than Stalin, saying, man will make it his purpose to master his own feelings, to raise his instincts to the heights of consciousness, to make them transparent, to extend the wires of his will into hidden recesses, and thereby to raise himself to a new plane, to create a higher social biologic type, or if you please, a Superman. So that's New Soviet Man. The idea was that New Soviet Man would toil with the name of Stalin glowing in his heart to beat the quota, and they came up with a lot of PR legends about him. One of those was a fellow called Stakhanov. Hold on, if I just find him. This fellow there, Alexei Stakhanov. He produced supposedly 14 times as much as anyone else in one shift. It was a total fiction, got up a lot of nonsense. He had more than 14 people helping him, propping up the pit, shoveling away the coal, basically doing the work that a miner would normally do for himself. It was a load of lies. It was meant to motivate other people to work harder. China had the same version. They went even further, as they tend to. This fellow called Lai Feng, you can see him there in his Red Army uniform. What he did was, when he was in his barracks at night when everyone else was asleep, he would quietly get up and go around and wash everyone's socks and clean out the toilets, and this got publicised. And there is today some doubt as to whether this fellow Lai Feng even existed, and certainly as to whether he went around washing people's socks after hours. So that's the kind of nonsense that came out about the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union could never get over the lack of incentive, because it was a big state that took the majority of what people earned in tax and then spent it as it saw fit, inefficiently. All right, the next objection to the Soviet Union was, okay, we can motivate. You might be able to motivate people through this idea of the new Soviet man. People took that seriously, very seriously in the West. But the next question was, how do you might be able to get them to work hard with joy in their hearts. How do you get them to work effectively in the right direction? And the Soviets then said, we're going to have planning, telling people what to do. And so you had a lot of 5-year plans of the Soviet Union. And there you can see 11 5-year plans. None of them worked. Some of them, like the second 5-year plan under Stalin, spectacularly unsuccessful, massive famine, huge, millions and millions of people died. It's not really known how many people died. The estimate tends to be somewhere between about 5 and 11 million, probably nearer the 5.5 million mark. But that was their answer. We're going to have a lot of planning. And eventually, when it was seen that the plans didn't work, then the West started saying, your Soviet system doesn't work. And the Soviets said, we're going to plan better now. Now the age of computers is here. We can use computers to manage the economy much more precisely. And that's not what you and I would call a computer. It was simply, you wouldn't even dignify their planning with as having the technical prowess of a spreadsheet. It was more like just a little word table that could add up figures. And that didn't work either. And the problem was, the problem that came about with the Soviet Union was that they couldn't develop IT. They had no hope. And they saw, even in the 60s, it was obvious that was the way the economy was going to go. And if you didn't have good IT, your economy was going to go down the tubes or stay down the tubes like the Soviet economy was. The Soviet economy basically produced a lot of weapons, a lot of arms, a lot of natural resources that it dug out of the ground, and not much else. And most of its factories were dedicated to producing arms. So it didn't produce much else, and it wasn't going to unless it could get into computers, which it couldn't do. And that was also a problem, because they came to realise that was going to hobble their military production. They had this massive army producing loads and loads of weapons, but the weapons would be rubbish because they wouldn't be able to coordinate them with IT, with technical high levels of technology, which is what what America was able to do as a result of having Silicon Valley. So what the Soviets then did was to steal a lot of American technology, and they were rubbish at that. And they eventually said the edict came down from on high saying, we're going to steal technology, but the only technology you're allowed to steal and use is IBM technology. All computers in the Soviet Union are going to be based on rip-offs of the IBM machine. And that then tied the Soviet Union to a form of computing that it couldn't adapt or reform. So it just couldn't get to grips with IT, which Russia is still pretty bad at the moment. But they were rubbish at it. So as a result of that, they then said, right, we've got to go all out to steal any IT we can with a massive program of industrial espionage. And that's what happened next with what was called, that came to a head in 1981-1982 with what was called the Farewell Dossier, where the Soviet Union, it was so desperate to get IT secrets out of the West. Every embassy was stuffed with industrial spies. And what you had, typical of a system that doesn't work like our system, you had a disgruntled security officer, a man who worked for the KGB, Vladimir Vetrov. He thought, I'm sick of the Soviet Union, nothing works, I'm tired of it, all we're doing is spying on other countries. So he went to France, and France went to America with a list of 250 agents working in foreign embassies, doing anything they could to steal foreign computer secrets. And America played it pretty clever at first. That was under Reagan. What they then did was to feed duff technology to the Soviet Union, which at one point the story is that duff technology caused the Trans-Siberian oil pipeline to blow up. And eventually that they rolled up all those 250 agents and the people that they were paying in American firms. And that completely put a stop to Soviet pretensions to technology. So that was a big shock to the Soviet Union. They realized there was no way they were going to catch up with the West. And that was 1981, 1982. Reagan's in power. He's talking about Star Wars. And that really puts the wind up the Soviet Union good and proper. And so they said, well, there's no choice. We now have to appoint, we're going to have to put a reformer in place. And yes, that's Mikhail Gorbachev. And in 1985, 11th of March 1985, he becomes General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, i.e. head honcho in Russia. And he immediately sets about destroying the economy. He thinks he's a true believer in socialism. And what he says is all we need to do is to set these state-owned industries free, and then the joy with which they produce for the masses will know no bounds, and they'll produce massive amounts, and we will then become as prosperous as the West, simply by allowing state monopolies to do what they like. And that was typical of Gorbachev, who was he was described quite often as a true believer. If I just bring this up, there you are. So he described Gorbachev as a true believer, not in the Soviet system as it functioned or didn't in 1985, but in its potential to live up to what he deemed its original ideals. I'll tell you what he said, or you can see what he said if you look at this book. I think this is the best book on the fall of the Soviet Union. There's a load of good books. They're really good. They really do cheer you up, because it's a really rotten, evil system collapsing to the ground. And they give you hope for the future for us, that our system just can't survive. Thank God. That's, hold on if I bring that up. The War That Never Was, David Price Jones, good historian. And I want to bring up some text from that book. Now, this was Gorbachev's contribution. It wasn't Glasnost, it wasn't perestroika, it was collapsing the Soviet Union by collapsing the economy. Gorbachev never accepted that you won't have a market unless you first privatize property. The essence of communism is the elimination of private property. In 1988, at a students' congress in Moscow, Gorbachev was asked what his attitude was toward private property. My position is that of the Communist Manifesto, he answered, which was mystifying. But I am sure the fellow who's talking here is a fellow called Vasily Selyunin, who was an economic advisor, a free market economic advisor to Gorbachev. He got really frustrated with Gorbachev having no clue about how an economy works. But I'm sure he meant it. He never changed his outlook. And then he says the law on state enterprises came into force on the 1st of January 1988. The gigantic industrial monopolies were to continue as before, but with a measure of freedom in running their affairs. And then this Vasily Selyunin says, it's rare when you can date a mistake so precisely. Independence should never have been given to state enterprises. They had all the rights of a proprietor, but none of the responsibilities. They could never go bankrupt. What does that sound like today? To me, that sounds like the big banks and the NHS. None of those, they just cannot go bankrupt. They're too big to fail, and too much. The NHS is too much of a holy of holies to be allowed to fail. Our group of economists recommended that this law would be disastrous, but Gorbachev and his team simply did not understand. It did the greatest damage to our economy. We had empty shops. Trade was only in the streets, in the black market. Between 1988 and 1991, there was a drop of over 25% in production. They printed money. Yeah, because you go to a state monopoly and you say you can set your own targets. You can set your own holidays and set your own pay rates. They're going to double their pay rates and halve their hours, which is, well, that's the sort of thing they did. So the Soviet authorities then had to bail out those big state enterprises which couldn't be allowed to go broke. So they printed money. Investment here is done entirely by the state through the budget. Defense spending also. That is why we had a budget deficit of more than 20%. If you look at the point where military coups are carried out in Latin America, you will find that they coincide with a budget deficit of 20%. That is when a country becomes ungovernable. We are not far from that in the UK now, or in the entire Western world. That is a lesson to take to heart. When the budget deficit reaches 20% I think he means GDP, not tax take, then that's when a country becomes ungovernable. So that's what Gorbachev did. He printed money in order, and it collapsed the economy, and the Soviet Union fell over. That's what's going to happen with us. I want to draw a parallel with our multicultural, big state, welfare state society, and how that is simply not going to work. I want to begin by just showing you an image and some text of a Times article from 2007. I haven't been able to find the article online. I'm sure it'll probably be behind a paywall, so I'll show you just an image of it from a different website. That is State of Mind. The British taxpayer is propping up an ever larger state. Now, it's too blurry to see the text. So the text is reproduced on some Russian website there. So if I show you that, under the Cyrillic script, you have the text of the article. What it is saying is that it shows the percentage of spending as a proportion of GDP region by region. So Northern Ireland in 2007 was 70.5%, Wales 64.33%, Scotland 55.6%, England 41%. The northeast of England was 63%, the northwest was 54%. So that's a lot of swathes of the UK, well over 50%, and Northern Ireland right up there with 70%. And that in 2009, that seems to be confirmed by an article in 2009 in the Daily Mail. I've gone to the Wayback Machine for this. Gordon Brown's splurge on public services will push government spending to Soviet levels. Gordon Brown's splurge on public services will take government spending to Soviet levels of almost 50% of national income, a report warns today. Now, that's I could go. You can read that article yourself if you go onto the Wayback Machine. But that's saying, look out, you could get over 50%. Well, we are now over 50%. Now, if I go to the next one, this report there, that's public spending stats for May 2020. A lot of tables there, but the one to look at here, I think I can show you that's the graph there. That is total managed expenditure, i.e. total government spending, as a proportion of GDP. This might seem nerdy, but the carry-home message is for every pound that gets earned in the UK, 51.9%, 52% gets spent by government. That is over 50%. That's right across the whole of the UK. I shudder to think what Northern Ireland and the north east of England are getting, and Wales are getting. It must be eye-watering, and that proportion is not going to go down. And in case you think, well, that's par for the course, we've always had that, I'll show you another table there. If you see that one, I think I'll see if I can bring up a bigger version of it there. That's the gap between receipts and spending. That blue line, that's government spending. Now that there, about 62%, that was the height of World War II. That there, about, I reckon, 48%, that peak there, that was probably about 1917, the height of World War I. And that peak there, that's today, or that was in 2021, that is about, well, that's 52%. So halfway between the peak of spending as a proportion of GDP in World War I and the peak of spending in World War II. And it will only, of course, they're forecasting a big drop in government spending. No way. Inflation, energy bills, the subsidies that are coming through, the promises that are being made to subsidise the energy market, that blue line is just going to keep going up. It's not going to be long before we hit the highest level ever of government spending as a proportion of GDP, higher than when we were fighting in the depths of World War II. And that you can't sustain that. We knew during World War II we couldn't sustain that. We knew during World War I. We're higher than that. There's no reason for it to come down. It can't come down. And that is the point. This can't be reformed. And the reason it can't be reformed is because, as is always the case in pre-breakdown situations, that there are too many people with too much say who get too much out of it, out of the level of government spending that there is. It was like that before the Russian Revolution. It was like that before the French Revolution. It's like that today. And I can show you that in detail. If I go on to the next tab, this is a BBC report from 2017. It's 5 years old. I bet it's a lot worse today. Reality check: are lower earners bearing the tax burden? Now, this will sound like I'm praising the rich and slagging off the poor. Not a bit of it. This is coming about because of high and rising levels of inequality, horrible levels of income inequality, largely pushed by loose governments, loose financial policy. So government spending, low interest rates, government stuffing money into the economy, which increase the value of assets, makes the rich people richer. And Figure 6, income tax contributions of the top 50% of taxpayers. Now, that pale green there, that's the top 1%. So they pay, I reckon, about 29% of the total income tax bill. Income tax is a good measure because there are some other taxes are more evenly spread across the population and they're all more aggressive. And there are some taxes that are more progressive, i.e. more concentrated amongst rich people. And so income tax is a good measure of showing who pays what. About 28%, 29% of the total income tax bill is paid by the top 1%. Now, that top 1% and the mid-green, the sort of fairly light green bit in the middle, those taken together, that is the top 10%. Now, the top 10%, they pay about, I'd say about 59% of all the income tax. And so what that means is the bottom 50%, they pay about 31% of the total income tax bill. So that basically means that I would calculate there's probably roughly about a 15-1 majority in favour of more tax and spend. So for every one person who loses by an increase in tax and spending, there are about 15 people for whom it's a net gain. They get out more than they put in. It gets rinsed, it gets sluiced through a horribly inefficient mechanism, i.e. the government, but a 15-1 majority or 15-1 incentive in favour of more tax and spend, that means that this situation where government spending is out of control, that cannot be reformed. You can't reform against a 15-1 tide, and so you're just not going to get this economic system is going to get worse and worse, and it will fall over for precisely the same reasons that the Soviet Union fell over, or in the same way that the Ancien regime in France fell over. And one day we're going to get a reformer like Gorbachev in the Soviet Union, or an economic reformer, or an economic reformer like Mirabeau before the French Revolution, who create disaster. And now, in case you think, there are plenty of things we can cut back on, I want to show you this report. This is Health Expenditure, UK Health Accounts Provisional Estimates of 2021. Now, if I just hold on, let me do that. That's the Office of National Statistics. Government healthcare expenditure in 2021 was higher than in any other year. In 2021, healthcare spending represented about 45% of overall government spending on goods and services in the UK. Now, that's the government saying that healthcare, 45% of their income was spent on healthcare, the NHS and other forms of healthcare. Now, that's hotly disputed on the liberal left-wing fact-checking sites. Of course they would dispute that, but this is the government giving their own figures. I would trust those figures, and there is no way they can cut back on that. That would be like the priest abolishing the Eucharist, just refusing to serve the Eucharist. You get torn down from the altar. If the government says, we've changed our minds, we're not going to fund the health service anymore, they'd get torn down from the seat of government. So the bottom line is that this system cannot be reformed. Now, on the one hand, that sounds like bad news. I'm basically saying this system is going to collapse. The economy is probably going to collapse, or at least the system is going to collapse. That's probably pretty scary for a lot of people. On the good side, what it means is within nationalist spheres, what it means is you can relax. You don't have to be totally committed. You don't have to be total about it. You don't have to be 110% outraged permanently and sending money to anyone who shouts loud enough on social media for you to send money so that they can go away on holiday and have a nice time. You don't have to do any of that. You don't have to be political. You don't have to have any truck with ideology. You don't really have to do very much. You don't have to oppose the system. The system is very good at opposing itself. It will collapse. You don't have to do anything to make it collapse. If all you do is just sit back, get on with your job and wait for it to break down, and then once it's broken down, you find a way to get access to law, to impose law upon yourself and to mix with other people who are governed by law, to find some way to join a legal system, a bit like joining a club. If that's all you do, that is more than enough, and we will win that way. In the meantime, you don't have to get ideological. Don't be the kind of person who just rants and has nothing to offer but opinions. That achieves nothing. My advice is to acquire and practice skills that other people want to pay for. Keep doing that quietly, because that actually makes you a person of some value, because you'd be surprised how adaptable a lot of those skills become. Don't become someone who's got a lot of very forceful opinions. Well, you might accuse me of that, but it's not that necessary. Just take care, look after yourself. Don't shell out your money to any shyster who demands it on social media. And when the system breaks down, then be alert, then be aware. You are going to need law. You're going to need to join some kind of legal system then. That is the primal need that you will need to satisfy if the state breaks down, as I think it will. In the meantime, remember this fella, Mikhail Gorbachev. Hold on, I'll show you there. Lovely guy, really nice fella, totally incompetent as regards economics. And the lesson of his life is simply, you don't have to get into a lot of Cold War rhetoric. Systems like this, systems like the Soviet system, systems like our system, they simply don't work. Thank you.